All right, hello class. I've got a lesson for you today. So we're looking at data, and we've been using COVID data a lot, but I think something that's really pressing in our current time frame is climate change. Now, before we even start, I want to ask to you all about climate change. So what do you know? So take a quick moment in the edpuzzle, go ahead and just write down everything you know about climate change, what's causing it, where is it headed, um, whether or not you think it's going to be a concern in your lifetime. Just go ahead and write some answers to these questions. All right, so some things I think you know is that it might be due to CO2, an increase specifically in our atmosphere. That's the main causal relationship. As CO2 increases, climate change becomes more of a factor. That is a causal relationship, at least as far as you know. It causes hotter than average temperatures around the world. Again, we can use that causal relationship. As CO2 increases, average temperature increases. And I'm pretty sure you all believe that this is going to become more and more of a concern. Well, here is the deal. This is all fake news. Yes, it is 100% fake news, and I have data to back up my claim. My evidence is going to be in the CO2 data. So let's go ahead and look at some of it. Right here, we have some CO2 data measured in parts per million. Now that's for every million particles of air. This is how many particles of CO2 are present. So we can see right here at this top point, there's about 350 particles for every million particles. And we can see that CO2 is decreasing. Now, if CO2 is decreasing and we set up these causal relationships, that means temperature should be decreasing, and therefore climate change isn't happening the way scientists say. So I guess I'll ask you what's wrong with this graph, but it looks pretty good to me. And if you want to know about where I got the CO2 data, because I didn't just make it up, I pulled it from the U.S. government's Earth System Research Laboratory Global Monitoring Division at Mauna Loa, Hawaii. So go ahead and take a moment in the puzzle. Tell me what's wrong with the graph, or what's wrong with my data. Write everything you can. You can use bullet points, full sentences, whatever. All right, so I did trick you. That data was old. It was from 1895. It was actually not even taken by the instruments there, but through like coring samples of ice and uh, other techniques that scientists use to look at things before we developed the technology to measure things like this data. So let's look at some more recent data. It's still going down, which means CO2 is still decreasing. So if CO2 is still decreasing, that means temperature should still be decreasing, and therefore climate change is not real. So with that said, I guess I'll ask you again, is anything wrong with this graph? So you can maybe repeat some of the stuff that you said before if you think it's still applicable. If you have some more ideas, go ahead and write them down. All right. So you may be thinking, one of the things you may have said is that if I had 5 points from 1895 and 5 points from the present, there should be a lot more data. And you know what? I think I'll show you all of it. Look at that. Now, you're right. I've been lying to you. CO2 is not decreasing. CO2 has actually been remaining constant. We can see that's a straight line. It hasn't changed at all. Therefore, what are we all talking about? We don't have to worry about carbon emissions. It's exactly the same. But I guess doing my due diligence, I'll ask you again. Do you see any other problems? You're not going to be able to say anything. All right, all right. No more tricks. So here's the actual scale data. I say scale to really promote that our both y-axis and x-axis include all the data and fit it almost perfectly, because without that, we get scenarios like this, where we either get this weird horizontal line because it's all squished, or if we go further back, we get a downward slope because I only took a small portion of the data. Specifically, that small portion being any of these little downward falls. So you're right, I've been messing with you. And we can see that CO2 is increasing. Our causal relationship of CO2 emissions matches temperature increase. So some things we want to be careful with. Data can and is manipulated to suit one's goals. We have to look out for data manipulation and ask the right questions. Those being, is all the data being shown, or is there even enough data? Is it properly scaled? Are our X and Y axes set to the right amounts? Is this data relevant? Is it current? And lastly, where's it coming from? We need to make sure we can trust our data as well. So with this in mind, the last question I have for you is go ahead and try and find a website that's got really bad data, a chart that just doesn't make sense, is scaled poorly, or is some way being used to manipulate people. Google whatever you need to get there. You can Google even examples of bad charts or bad data. Um, so go ahead and see what you need to find and explain why this chart is bad. So just post a URL to the website and then a little explanation about why it's bad. Otherwise, thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation.